Hello everyone. Before we start, hit that like button and subscribe. Drop a comment with where you're watching from and what time it is for you. That's how YouTube keeps sending you stories like this. And now, let's get into it. It was a little after 3 in the morning when dispatch sent us to a possible DOA on Juniper Lane. The snow had been falling since midnight, thick and heavy, sticking to everything. The streets were quiet except for the sound of the chains on the back tires slapping against the frozen pavement. Scranton looks different at that hour. No headlights, no people. Just the orange glow of the streetlights bouncing off the snow. Everything feels slower, heavier. The kind of stillness that makes you think too much between calls. Juniper Lane was a small residential road tucked behind a row of older homes. The houses there all looked the same. Single-story ranches, narrow driveways, and old Christmas lights still hanging from the eaves. When we turned in, the plows hadn't come through yet. The ambulance pushed through a few inches of fresh snow before we stopped in front of the address. Number 42. Porch light on, driveway buried, no tire tracks. The neighbor who called had said she hadn't seen the woman in 2 days. Probably a welfare check that turned into a body recovery. It happens more often than people think. We parked with the headlights shining across the small yard. The snow was still falling hard enough to muffle everything. You could hear the static of the radio through the quiet. I stepped out first, my boots crunching through the crust of snow. The air was sharp, freezing against my face. My partner grabbed the gear bag and flashlight while I went to the back door. There were no footprints, no sign anyone had been in or out since the snow started. The back door was unlocked, just like dispatch said. The kind of thing that always gives you a small knot in your stomach. Not fear exactly, just the sense that you're walking into something final. The smell hit almost immediately. Even through the cold, you could smell that heavy, sweet rot that only comes from human decay. Not overpowering yet, but distinct enough that you know exactly what you're dealing with. I pushed the door open slowly and stepped into the kitchen. It was spotless. Counters clean, dishes washed, everything lined up neatly. The kind of house where someone cared about keeping order. Heat was still running, thermostat at 70. The air was dry, warm, quiet. No sign of struggle, no disarray. Just a home paused mid-routine. The living room was to the left. The TV was still on. One of those local channels that looped the same weather update over and over. The light from it flickered across the recliner, where she sat. The woman was maybe in her 70s. Small frame, thin hands resting on the armrests, head tilted to the side. Eyes half open, fixed on nothing. A blanket draped across her legs. Cup of tea on the side table next to her. Still half full, but dark and stale. She'd probably died watching TV, no sign of trauma. No sign of anything other than time doing what it always does when nobody's watching. Rigor had already set in. Her hands stiff, joints locked. The color of her skin was pale and waxy. That grayish-yellow tone that always stands out under artificial light. I checked her wrist anyway, out of habit. Cold to the touch. I felt the faint weight of the house pressing in. That silence that seems to grow heavier once you know the person inside it isn't alive. My partner started taking out the paperwork, preparing the pronouncement form. We'd done this 100 times before, but every time there's a small part of you that pauses. You start looking at the little details. The framed photos on the wall, the crossword puzzle book next to the chair, the Christmas cards on the mantle. It all feels like the echo of a life that ended quietly, without anyone noticing. That's when I heard it. A faint scraping sound. Barely there at first. I thought it was maybe the furnace kicking on or something shifting with the heat. But it came again. Slow, uneven, like nails dragging against wood. I looked down, scanning with the flashlight. The sound was coming from directly under the recliner. I told my partner to hold up. We both stood still, listening. The noise was clearer now. Small movements, a faint shuffle, then another scrape. It wasn't mechanical. It was alive. I knelt down slowly, leaned to one side, and shined the light under the chair. That's when I saw it. A pair of glassy eyes staring back, reflecting the beam. The cat was wedged deep beneath the footrest mechanism, trapped between the metal arms. Its fur was matted, dirty, bones visible beneath the skin. It was barely breathing, sides rising shallowly. It didn't make a sound, just kept moving its mouth, biting at something in the dark. For a second, I couldn't tell what it was doing. Then I saw the marks on the woman's ankle. The cat had been gnawing at her, desperate, starving, probably trapped there since she'd died. It's strange how the human brain reacts in those moments. You want to recoil, but part of you just keeps going, because that's your job. You deal with what's in front of you. I reached under with a gloved hand, trying to free it. The thing hissed weakly, teeth scraping against the glove, but there was no strength behind it. I managed to lift the lever that released the footrest, and it crawled out, dragging its hind legs, leaving small smears of dried blood on the carpet. It didn't run, just sat there next to the recliner, trembling, looking at nothing. Its fur was missing in patches, tail thin as a rope. It looked both alive and almost gone at the same time. The kind of thing that sticks in your head long after the scene's cleared. We called it in. PD arrived first, then the coroner. Standard procedure. Time of death estimated, photos taken, documentation signed. They took her body out an hour later, zipped in a black bag, wheeled carefully through the snow. I stood outside while they worked, watching my breath curl into the cold air. The sky was starting to lighten just slightly, that pale gray before sunrise. The snow had stopped falling, leaving everything still and perfect, like the night was trying to cover what had just happened. Inside, the house felt emptier than before. The TV was off now, but the hum of the heater filled the silence. The cat was sitting by the chair again, eyes half closed. I thought about taking it to animal control, but the officer said they'd handle it. I left my gloves on the counter, used pair number 2 from the bag. Couldn't bring myself to use the same ones again. Some things just stay with you, and you don't really know why. On the drive back to the station, I kept thinking about that house, the neatness of it, the fact that the back door was unlocked, the light still on, the heat running like she might come back any minute, death in its quietest form. No struggle, no drama, just a slow fading that no one noticed. But the cat, that part wouldn't leave my mind, a living thing trapped beneath her, waiting in the dark, doing whatever it had to do to survive. Both of them alone, inches apart, both waiting for help that came too late. We cleaned the gear when we got back, logged the call, wrote the report. Routine. The paperwork reads like any other. Elderly female, found deceased, no foul play suspected. But it's never that simple. Every time you walk into a house like that, you feel the weight of absence. How life keeps going around it, while that one quiet space freezes in time. That morning, the city woke up. The plows finally came through. People went to work. The snow melted off the ambulance roof by noon. But I kept thinking about that chair. The faint sound of scraping under the hum of the heater. That small reminder that even when everything looks still, something beneath it might still be moving, waiting, holding on just a little longer. I didn't tell anyone about the cat for a long time, not because it was gruesome, but because it felt like something private between the living and the dead, the kind of detail that doesn't belong on a report. Months later, when winter started fading, I drove down Juniper Lane again after another call nearby. The house was dark, for sale sign planted in the yard. Snow gone, grass brown and patchy. A curtain still hung in the window, same as before. Everything looked smaller in daylight. I parked for a minute, engine running, watching the empty driveway. No tracks, no movement. Just stillness again. The kind that gets under your skin and never quite leaves. That night I went home and couldn't bring myself to turn on the TV. I sat in the quiet, listening to the hum of my own heater, staring at the empty corner of my living room. Every creak of the house sounded sharper. Every small sound made me think of that faint scraping. Sometimes the hardest part of this job isn't what you see. It's what stays behind afterward. The things you can't unhear once you've noticed them. That night on Juniper Lane was one of them. A spotless house, a quiet death, and something still alive, waiting in the dark beneath it all. It was a hot night in Flagstaff, the kind that makes the asphalt shimmer even after the sun's been down for hours. July 2019. My partner and I were parked behind the station trying to cool off. Windows down, shirts sticking to our backs from the heat. Dispatch came through around 11:45 p.m. Chevron on Route 66. Woman in labor, active delivery. I remember rolling my eyes, thinking it'd be another roadside birth story we'd laugh about later. We'd had a few that summer. Long drives, hot cars, desperate people. But this one would stick with me in a way I didn't expect. The Chevron was one of those all-night ones. Bright white lights buzzing over the pumps, moths swirling around the canopy. The air smelled like gasoline and dust. There were only 2 cars out front, and a semi idling in the corner of the lot. The clerk was outside before we even parked, waving his arms, shouting for us to hurry. His face was pale, slick with sweat. He just pointed toward the store and said the bathroom. I could already hear someone crying inside. We grabbed the OB kit from the rig and ran in. The place was quiet except for that crying. The bathroom was at the back, single stall, door propped open with a trash can. Inside, a young woman was crouched on the floor, barefoot, knees spread. One hand on the tile, the other bracing against the toilet. There was blood and amniotic fluid pooled around her. The baby's head was already out. She looked maybe mid-20s, dark hair stuck to her face, wearing an oversized hoodie and shorts that were half soaked. Her eyes were wide open but unfocused, like she wasn't really there. Her breathing was shallow and fast. We went to work without thinking. My partner got gloves on and dropped to her side while I called for an ambulance backup and checked her vitals. Her pulse was racing but steady. She didn't fight us or even really acknowledge us. She just kept whispering something under her breath. I leaned closer, trying to catch what she was saying over the crying and the hum of the bathroom fan. It sounded like, "He's not supposed to find me," over and over again. Barely a whisper. The delivery itself went smooth. The baby came fully out within a minute or two, crying loud and strong. A girl. Healthy color, breathing fine. We wrapped her in a towel from our kit and cleared the airway. The clerk was standing in the doorway with his hands over his mouth, eyes wide like he was watching a movie. My partner told him to grab some blankets, anything clean. The woman finally looked up, eyes locking on the baby, and for a moment she seemed calm. She reached out, trembling, and we handed the child to her. She held her close, rocking slightly, but still kept mumbling that same thing. "He's not supposed to find me." I remember crouching beside her, asking if she had anyone we could call, where she came from, how far along she'd been. No response. She just stared at the floor tiles. Her breathing slowed a little, but she looked exhausted, drained. I thought she might pass out from shock or blood loss, so I told my partner to grab fluids from the rig. He'd barely stepped outside when I heard the front door of the store slam open. Heavy footsteps on the linoleum. Fast, angry. The kind of footsteps that make you straighten up before you even see who it is. Then a man appeared in the doorway, sweating, shirt half untucked, eyes wide and wild. He looked like he'd been running for miles. He shouted a name I didn't recognize, and when his eyes landed on the woman holding the baby, everything in his face changed. His expression went from panic to fury in an instant. His teeth clenched, his hands curled into fists, and for a second it didn't feel like we were in a gas station bathroom anymore. It felt like a trap. I stepped between him and her, told him to stay back. He didn't even look at me at first, just kept glaring at her and the baby. My partner came running back in from outside and shoved the guy toward the hall, yelling for the clerk to call the cops. The man struggled, shouting that the woman was his wife, that the baby was his. But there was something in his voice that didn't sound right. It wasn't fear or relief. It was pure rage. The woman had gone completely still. Her eyes rolled back slightly and she slumped against the wall, the baby still crying in her arms. I grabbed the baby before she slipped and checked her pulse. Weak but still there. She'd passed out cold. My partner had the man pinned against the door frame trying to keep him out, and I could hear sirens in the distance. The whole place smelled like blood, sweat, and gasoline. When the police arrived, everything happened fast. They dragged the man outside, still shouting her name, still calling her his wife. One of the officers came in to help us carry the woman out to the stretcher. The baby was wrapped tight in the towel, still crying, tiny lungs working hard in the humid air. The woman didn't wake up the whole ride to the hospital. We kept her on oxygen, checked her vitals every few minutes. Stable, but in shock. At the hospital, I stood in the hallway while the doctors took her and the baby inside. My hands were shaking. The smell of disinfectant burned my nose, and I realized how soaked my shirt was with sweat. My partner came over, said the cops told him the guy had driven down from Colorado. They'd found his car parked behind the gas station. He'd been following her for weeks, tracking her through social media check-ins and tagged posts. She'd run away while pregnant, trying to hide before the baby came. He'd finally caught up. I couldn't get that image out of my head, the way she'd whispered, "He's not supposed to find me." It wasn't fear of birth or pain. It was fear of him, like she knew he was coming. Like she'd been running for so long that even in labor, her first thought was to hide. The report later said she'd been staying in a cheap motel a few miles away under a fake name. The clerk at the Chevron recognized her from earlier that evening. She'd come in barefoot, bought a bottle of water and a small pack of diapers. She'd told him she was waiting for a friend. He said she seemed nervous, glancing out the window every few seconds. The baby was fine, born premature but healthy. The woman recovered physically after a few days, but I never found out what happened to her afterward. We don't usually get updates on calls like that once the patients leave our hands. All I know is the police kept the guy locked up, at least for a while. There was talk about restraining orders, charges, custody hearings, all the things that come after the adrenaline's gone and real life creeps back in. For a few nights after that call, I couldn't sleep right. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that gas station bathroom, the harsh fluorescent light, the hum of the fan, the reflection of all of us in the mirror over the sink, the smell of blood mixing with cheap lemon cleaner. The way her voice cracked when she whispered that one line, it played over and over in my head. In this job, you learn that not every call is about saving a life in the medical sense. Sometimes it's about standing between someone and whatever monster they're trying to escape. Sometimes it's a car wreck or a heart attack. Sometimes it's a person who just wants to disappear and can't. That night, at that Chevron on Route 66, I understood that better than ever. We delivered a baby, yeah, but what we really did was give a woman a few more minutes to stay alive long enough to get away. It's been years, but every time I drive past that station, I still look at the bathroom door through the glass, and I remember the sound of her whispering under her breath, that tiny baby crying in her arms, and the footsteps of a man who was never supposed to find her. It was just after dawn when dispatch called it in. A fisherman had spotted what looked like a submerged vehicle in the Mackenzie River, just outside Eugene. The tone in the dispatcher's voice had that weight to it. It wasn't a maybe, it was a car in the water. Possible entrapment. Those calls never start easy, and they never end right. The road leading out there was slick, still damp from the mist that always seems to hang around the river that time of year. Early March. Cold enough that your breath hung in front of you when you stepped out of the rig. The sun was still low, filtered through a gray sky and thin fog curling off the water. We parked behind the fire engine and a patrol car that had already arrived. The fisherman stood off to the side near the embankment, hands jammed into his pockets, face pale. From the bank, I could see the car. It was upside down, the roof barely visible under the current, water pushing over it in ripples. A dark shape where no car should ever be. Fire had divers already suiting up, and police were stringing yellow tape along the shoulder of the road. The sound of the river was louder than the voices around me. That steady, rushing sound that drowns everything out, like white noise. I remember the smell. Cold river water has a kind of clean metallic scent to it, mixed with mud and pine. It hits you deep in your lungs. We stood there waiting while the divers worked their way in. The water was freezing, probably in the 40s. You could see steam rising off the surface every time a diver moved. They reached the car after a few minutes. The surface rippled, bubbles breaking where they went under. Then silence. Everyone stood still. I glanced at my partner. He didn't say anything, just watched, hands on his belt. After what felt like forever, one of the divers surfaced. He yelled something, but the river swallowed the words. Another diver came up beside him, both of them holding onto the side of the overturned car. I could see them struggling with something inside. Then one of them raised a hand and gave the signal. 2 victims. The firefighters on shore moved fast, setting up the backboards and tarps on the gravel. The divers pulled the first body out, an adult male. They floated him to shore, faces tight and eyes down. The man's skin was pale gray, his hair plastered flat, clothes dark and heavy with water. He looked mid-30s, maybe early 40s. They laid him on the tarp. A second diver appeared moments later, holding something smaller in his arms. A child. The boy couldn't have been older than 6. He was still strapped in his seat, the whole car seat brought up with him. The straps were tight across his chest and the divers had cut them away to lift him out. It was quiet when they brought him up. Even the river seemed to hush for a second. We moved in to start assessment, even though everyone knew what the outcome would be. Water that cold. They hadn't been breathing for a long time. Still, protocol is protocol. I checked the man first, no pulse. Skin waxy, eyes open slightly. Rigor hadn't fully set in, which meant it hadn't been that long. Maybe a few hours. The boy was the same. Pupils fixed, skin cold but not yet stiff. The fire captain walked over and said the car's clock showed 2:17 a.m. That detail stuck with me. It meant they'd gone in during the night, sometime between last call and sunrise. The divers stayed in the water, working to secure the car for towing. It was a small sedan, maybe 10 or 15 feet from shore. From what I could see, it had probably missed the bend in the road above us. The guardrail there was bent, shiny metal scraped clean. Tire tracks cutting through wet grass. Probably hit the shoulder, went over, rolled down the slope and flipped into the river. I walked along the bank following the drag marks where the car had gone in. The mud was slick, still fresh. There were bits of glass scattered near the bottom. One of the officers pointed out that the headlights were still faintly glowing underwater, like 2 dim orbs under the surface. It made the whole scene feel wrong, that quiet glow under the moving current. When the tow truck came, they hooked cables to the frame, and slowly the car started to rise. The water poured out in sheets as it turned, dripping mud and weeds. It looked almost peaceful as it hung there for a moment, water running from the open doors. Then they set it down on the bank. I walked up to help check the interior. The seats were soaked, bits of leaves and sticks floating inside. The man's wallet had been wedged near the gas pedal. I took it out and handed it to the officer. The photo on the ID showed a smiling man, same face, just alive. The kind of photo people take at the DMV when they're not trying too hard but still hopeful. There was a phone between the seats, half submerged. I picked it up and handed it over to police. The screen had cracked from the impact, but one message was still on the screen. Unsent. Just a few words. I'm sorry. I missed the turn. It wasn't sent. The timestamp matched the clock, 2:17 a.m. I stepped back after that. The cold air stung my face and I could feel the dampness soaking through my boots from the riverbank. Fire was packing up, the divers climbing out and stripping off gear. Everyone was quiet, just doing what they had to. The coroner arrived not long after. We stayed while they took photos, logged evidence, and zipped the bodies. That's always the worst part, the sound of the zippers. You never get used to it. When things slowed down, I found myself walking back toward the car again. The tow truck driver was tightening the straps around it, getting ready to haul it away. Looked through the rear window and that's when I saw it. A small handprint on the inside of the glass pressed into the mud that had settled there. Just one smudged but clear enough to see each little finger. It faced upward, like the boy had been trying to push toward the surface. It hit me harder than I expected. The divers said the car had filled slowly. Didn't sink right away. The father must have stayed conscious long enough to realize what was happening. Maybe trying to unbuckle the boy. Maybe running out of breath as the car filled inch by inch. You think about that moment. The sound of water coming in, the cold creeping up, the seatbelt stuck, the weight of everything pulling down. I kept replaying it in my head. He must have known there was no way out. Still, he tried. You could see it in the position of the seats, the buckle half open, the phone wedged tight between them. That message, "I'm sorry, I missed the turn." It said everything. We cleared the scene after the coroner left. The fisherman who called it in was still there, sitting on the tailgate of his truck. He looked shaken, staring at the water like it might give him an answer. I nodded to him as we walked by, but he didn't look up. The drive back into town was quiet. My partner didn't talk, and neither did I. Sometimes silence is easier than trying to put something like that into words. The fog had lifted a little, and you could see the tops of the trees reflecting in the river as we passed over the bridge. When we got back to the station, I logged the run. Time of arrival, time of departure, cause. Single vehicle accident, double fatality. Just another line in a report. But the image wouldn't leave my head. The child's handprint, the cracked phone screen, the clock frozen at 2:17 a.m. A few days later, I heard through one of the officers that the man had been a local, lived not far from where they went in. Divorced, shared custody of the boy. That night was his weekend. They'd probably been driving back from somewhere late. Maybe the kid fell asleep in the back seat. The road there curves hard, no lighting, steep drop. Easy to misjudge in the dark, especially if you're tired. I drove that stretch a week later on my day off. Just wanted to see it in daylight. The skid marks were still faintly there, the grass torn up. The guardrail had been replaced. The river looked calm, like nothing had happened. Just cold, clear water moving past the stones, sunlight flickering on the surface. I stood there a while, listening to it. You could almost convince yourself that the river forgets, that it doesn't hold on to things. But I think it does. You don't pull two people out of it and walk away unchanged. I never told anyone about the handprint. It wasn't something that needed to go in a report. Just one of those details that stays with you. Not because it's dramatic, but because it's real. A reminder that behind every call, every scene, every number in a report, there's that moment of human struggle no one sees. Sometimes at night, when I'm driving home after a shift, I think about that message on his phone. "I'm sorry. I missed the turn." It's simple, but it carries so much. The kind of thing you'd write in a panic, hoping someone would know it wasn't on purpose. Maybe he wanted the boy's mother to see it, to know he didn't mean for any of it to happen. I still remember the smell of the river that morning. The cold, clean air, the way the mist hung low over the water, soft and gray, the sound of boots on wet gravel, the way everyone moved carefully, quietly, as if the river might wake up if we made too much noise. That morning stayed with me for years. You see a lot in this job, crashes, overdoses, suicides. But the ones that stay with you aren't the bloody or violent ones. They're the quiet ones. The ones that make you imagine what the last few minutes must have felt like. The car was gone, the road was repaired, and the river kept moving. But every time I drive past that bend now, I slow down without meaning to. The clock in that car stopped at 2:17 a.m. For everyone else, time went on. But for that father and son, everything ended right there. It was a little after 2 in the morning when dispatch sent us to Injured Transient Behind Shopping Center, off Appalachie Parkway. The air felt like soup, thick and heavy even at that hour. Tallahassee heat in April doesn't care if it's night. It still clings to your skin, sticky and sour with humidity. I remember the glow of the strip mall lights reflecting off the wet asphalt, the buzzing of the old sodium lamps, and the way the air smelled faintly like garbage and exhaust. The call didn't sound like anything special. We got dozens like it. Homeless guy, maybe drunk, maybe hurt, probably just dehydrated. We parked behind the building, headlights catching the rusted metal of an old loading dock. Everything looked deserted. The back lot was half overgrown, the kind of place that collects trash over years. Torn tarps, cardboard, broken bottles, and grocery bags caught in the weeds. We killed the siren, left the flashers running low, and stepped out. My boots sank into soft mud almost immediately. The only light came from the rig, and a flickering bulb above a back door that probably hadn't been opened in months. The call note said, male. Mid-30s, possible lacerations, difficulty breathing. We split up, I grabbed the jump bag and flashlight. My partner took the monitor and stretcher. I swept the light over the grass, listening. You can usually hear people before you see them. Groaning, coughing, something. But it was quiet. Just the hum of insects and the distant buzz of the highway. Then I caught a sound. Sharp breathing, fast, ragged. Off to the right, near the fence line. I followed it with the flashlight and the beam caught a shape on the ground. A man lying shirtless in the tall grass, chest rising and falling in shallow bursts. His skin looked pale and slick under the light, covered in sweat and dirt. I called for my partner, dropped the bag next to him and knelt down. He was shaking, small tremors running through his arms. His chest heaved like he couldn't get enough air. The cut stood out first. Thin, parallel lines up both forearms. Dried blood crusted around them. Not deep enough to be self-harm. More like he'd scraped himself against something or been clawing at his own skin. His lips were dry and cracked, and his pupils, I'll never forget that, they were huge, swallowing the color of his eyes. I checked for trauma, bleeding, broken bones. Nothing life-threatening, just those scratches and the fast breathing. His pulse was racing around 140, irregular. I leaned in close to listen to his chest, and that's when he started mumbling. The words came out shaky and wet like he was half choking. "They're in the grass," he kept saying. "They're in the grass." At first I thought it was the usual, meth, bath salts, maybe heat delirium. I've seen people swear they're covered in spiders or bugs when it's really just drug psychosis. I tried to calm him down, told him to keep still, but he kept twitching and jerking like something was crawling on him. His hands moved weakly across his chest, scratching. I shined the light around us, half to check the area, half to reassure myself there was nothing there. But as I did, I noticed the grass. It wasn't just swaying from the breeze. There was movement. Small, fast ripples like something burrowing under the soil. At first I thought maybe snakes, maybe field mice. But there were dozens of them. Little humps in the dirt shifting back and forth. It made the ground seem alive. I told myself it was just bugs or the light playing tricks. But then the smell hit. Rot, garbage, wet soil, thick and foul enough to taste. My stomach turned. It smelled like something dead was buried nearby. I moved my knee slightly and heard a crack. I looked down and saw what I'd stepped on. A small turtle shell hollowed out, the inside crawling with maggots. I felt that electric jolt in my chest, the kind you get when your brain finally catches up with what your eyes are seeing. I moved the light again and saw more shells scattered in the grass, some broken, some whole but empty. Like whatever had been living there just disappeared. The smell seemed to come from them. My partner came over with the stretcher, muttering about the stink, and we tried to roll the man onto the backboard. He wasn't fighting us anymore. His chest still moved, but the breaths were slower, shallow. I checked his airway, clear, and started getting vitals again. His pulse had dropped, still fast but fading. His eyes had rolled halfway back. We got him on the stretcher and started moving toward the rig. The grass brushed against my legs as we went, and I swear I could feel things brushing back. Not hard enough to be sure, just a faint sliding against my boots. Every step made that soft squishing sound of wet soil. I tried not to think about what was under it. When we lifted him into the ambulance, I noticed his fingers were still moving, weak little scratching motions against his chest. I placed the monitor pads on him, started oxygen, checked his pupils again. No change. He wasn't responding. Then his breathing slowed even more, chest barely rising. We started bagging him, my partner getting a line ready. But within a minute, the waveform flatlined, no pulse, no respirations. We worked him for a while. Compressions, airway, everything by the book. Nothing brought him back. Sweat poured down my neck, the air inside the rig stifling. Eventually, we called it. Pronounced at 2:57 a.m. Afterward, I sat on the back bumper wiping my hands on a towel. The smell from the field was still on me. That same rotten, earthy stench that wouldn't wash off no matter how much sanitizer I used. The cops arrived soon after. We gave our report, told them what we'd seen. The scratches, the erratic breathing, the mention of things in the grass. They didn't say much, just took notes shined their flashlights around and started taping off the area. One of them said they'd found a little camp nearby. Tarp, sleeping bag, some cans of food, a bucket half full of rainwater. Looked like he'd been living there a while. Probably got sick, maybe infected cuts, maybe withdrawal. They'd figure it out at autopsy. We cleared the scene after an hour. On the drive back, I couldn't stop replaying it. The way the ground moved, the smell, the hollow shells. My partner said it was just bugs, that Florida soil is full of things. Burrowing animals, grubs, worms, whatever. I wanted to believe that, I really did. But later that morning when I got home, I kicked off my boots by the door and caught a whiff of that same sour rot. I turned them over and saw streaks of mud caked deep into the treads, thick, dark, and clinging. I cleaned them outside with a hose, but even then, when the water ran off, it left behind tiny white larvae wriggling on the concrete. I watched them curl and twist in the light for a moment before washing them down the drain. A week later, we got word from the coroner's office. The man had died from sepsis, massive systemic infection. His bloodstream was full of bacteria, and there were signs of severe dehydration and malnutrition. The cuts on his arms were self-inflicted. He'd been digging into his own skin, convinced something was crawling underneath. They said he'd been camped behind that shopping center for at least 3 weeks, surviving on canned food and rainwater. The infection probably started from those small cuts, got worse, spread. When it reached his blood, it drove him delirious. The hallucinations weren't drugs. They were fever dreams. It made sense. It all made sense. Except for the movement in the grass. I went back to that area a few days later. Not officially, just curious. The police tape was still up, the lot quiet. I parked by the fence and stood there for a long time listening. Nothing but the hum of insects and the distant sound of traffic. I walked out a bit into the grass, flashlight in hand. Everything looked the same. Flattened spots where we'd knelt, bits of tape still clinging to stems. But the turtle shells were gone. So was the smell. I kicked at the soil with my boot. It was soft, damp, but still, no movement. I crouched, pressed my hand against the ground, felt only the warmth of the earth. For a second, I thought maybe I'd imagined it all. The movement, the smell, everything. Maybe my brain had filled in the blanks because of the stress, the heat, the adrenaline. That happens more often than people think. But as I stood up to leave, I noticed something small glinting in the dirt. I picked it up, a fragment of shell, thin as paper, brittle between my fingers. It crumbled as soon as I touched it. Underneath, the soil looked different, darker, richer, like compost. And when I stepped back, I saw faint little holes around the area, no bigger than a pencil disappearing into the ground. Maybe just insects. Maybe burrowing beetles or larvae or something that feeds on decay. Florida has a lot of things like that. The kind that thrive in heat and wetness. The kind that come up from underground when the conditions are right. That's what I told myself as I walked back to the truck. But the whole drive home, I couldn't shake the feeling that he hadn't been hallucinating completely. He'd been right about one thing. There really was something in the grass. It was late in May 2020, a warm evening just outside Lincoln, Nebraska. The air felt heavy, wet from an earlier storm that had passed through. My partner and I had just finished restocking the rig when dispatch came over the radio. Male, unresponsive, unknown cause. Coordinates pinned it somewhere off a rural road west of the city. I remember looking at the map and seeing nothing but empty space. No nearby houses, just a thin gray road cutting through open fields. The caller had hung up mid-sentence, dispatch said. That always adds a layer of unease. The drive out took about 20 minutes. The road turned from asphalt to gravel, then to dirt slick and patchy from rain. The GPS led us down a narrow lane, barely wide enough for the ambulance. The field stretched on endlessly, patches of tall grass and muddy puddles catching the reflection of our headlights. When we finally saw the trailer, it was like it had been dropped there by accident. A single, rust-streaked mobile home sitting in a low spot surrounded by mud. No other structures, no lights, nothing. We parked as close as we could, maybe 15 feet away. The ground was soft enough that our boots sank when we stepped out. The place was quiet except for frogs in the ditches and the distant hum of power lines. The front door of the trailer was wide open, hanging crooked on one hinge. The interior was completely dark, except for the faint, steady buzzing sound coming from somewhere inside. I grabbed my kit, called out to let whoever was inside know we were there, but there was no response. When I stepped into the doorway, the smell hit me first. Not decay, not exactly, but a thick, earthy stench like damp soil and spoiled food. My flashlight beam swept over a cluttered living space, stacks of newspapers, plastic containers, jars filled with cloudy liquid, and the faint movement of small black dots across the floor. The man was sitting at the kitchen table, perfectly upright, mid-40s maybe, thin, wearing a gray t-shirt and jeans. His hands rested loosely on his lap, his head tilted slightly to one side. The skin on his face had a pale, waxy look, eyes half open and glassy. He looked like he'd just stopped mid-thought. On the table in front of him were 2 syringes, a glass of water, and half of a ham sandwich on a paper plate. The bread was stale, edges curling. It looked like it had been sitting there for at least a day. I checked for a pulse even though I already knew what I'd find. Cold skin, no carotid response, no rise in the chest. He'd been gone for a while, but what got under my skin was the silence, or rather the almost silence. That faint buzzing didn't stop. It was steady, rhythmic, and close. It seemed to come from down the hallway. The bathroom door was cracked open. My light caught something glinting inside. When I pushed the door open fully, I stopped in my tracks. On the floor sat a large white bucket, half filled with moving, writhing insects. Flies, beetles, worms, alive, all of them. They shifted and crawled over each other, the sound of their movement like dry leaves. The tub next to it was lined with them too. The tile was streaked with dirt, maybe soil from outside, maybe something else. There were trays set up on the counter with bits of decaying meat, labeled in marker with dates. A notebook sat open beside the sink, filled with dense handwriting and diagrams of insects. There was even a small desk fan rigged to blow air across one of the trays. The smell was thick and almost sweet, like rotting fruit. I remember standing there, frozen, trying to make sense of it. The man in the other room, the open door, the buzzing. My partner came up behind me and shined his light across the walls. Small containers lined up like a collection, each one filled with different species. It wasn't random. He'd been studying them, cataloging them. Later we'd find out he'd been an entomologist, recently unemployed. But at that moment, all we knew was that he'd been alone, and whatever he'd been doing here, it had consumed him. We radioed for the sheriff's department and medical examiner, then stepped outside to get some air. Even with the door open, I felt the buzzing in my ears as if it was stuck there. When we went back inside to wait for the deputies, I noticed something strange. The sound wasn't just from the bathroom anymore. It was faintly everywhere, in the walls, the corners, the folds of his clothes. When we finally moved him to the stretcher, a few flies lifted from his shirt collar and circled the air between us before disappearing toward the ceiling. Loading him into the ambulance, I could still hear that low hum. It clung to everything, the stretcher wheels, the floor, our uniforms. By the time we turned back onto the main road, the sound had faded, but I kept feeling it in my scalp, a ghost of vibration. That night when I went home, I took 2 showers, changed clothes twice. Still, when I lay down, I could swear I heard that same faint buzz right at the edge of hearing. The next day, we got the report. The man's name was Alan. He'd worked for a local university before being laid off. His neighbors said he rarely came into town. He'd been ordering insect larvae, pet food, and plastic bins in bulk for months. The syringes were filled with a nutrient solution he'd been using to feed his specimens. Toxicology came back clean. No drugs, no alcohol. His cause of death was cardiac arrest, probably from exhaustion or malnutrition. He hadn't eaten properly in weeks. They said the house was crawling with life. Every kind of insect native to the area. Some species not even common around here. They found his notes covering decomposition cycles, body decay stages, larval development. It was detailed, obsessive. The sheriff told us he'd been trying to replicate the conditions of decay without a corpse. that he'd been studying how insects behave when deprived of a host. For weeks after, I couldn't shake the image of that bucket in the bathroom, the surface alive with movement. The sound it made wasn't loud, but it had a weight to it, like a living heartbeat. Every time I heard an electric hum, a fan motor, or even a fly against a window, my stomach turned. It brought back that field, that open door, and that man sitting alone at his table, half-eaten sandwich beside him. The worst part wasn't what I saw, though. It was how normal it all seemed in the end. No sign of struggle, no sign of panic. He'd been calmly documenting every stage, even as his own body gave out. The idea that someone could spend so long studying the slow process of decay and then quietly become part of it, that's what stayed with me. A few weeks later, the sheriff's department burned what they couldn't sanitize. They said the infestation had spread through the walls and floorboards. The whole trailer had to go. The smoke could be seen for miles across the flat Nebraska fields, gray against the pale sky. Even now, when I drive past that area, I still think about it. It's just empty land again, grass growing over the ruts where the trailer once sat. But every time the wind shifts, carrying that faint electric hum from power lines, I remember standing in that doorway, hearing that first steady buzz, realizing too late that the sound wasn't just in the room. It was already on us. It had followed us out, and it still does. It was a little after 9 p.m. when dispatch sent us to a possible overdose on the old Route 99 strip in Bakersfield. That stretch of road always made my stomach tighten. The motels there looked the same no matter the year. Peeling stucco, buzzing signs, doors that never quite closed right. The heat didn't help either. Even at night, the air was thick, dry, and heavy with that smell of dust and asphalt that never really went away in summer. August 2023 had been brutal. Record highs, blackouts, and a string of calls that all felt the same lately. Heat strokes, overdoses, and people living too close to the edge. When we pulled up, the motel sign flickered between red and pink. Vacancy blinked against the cracked paint of the second floor. A man at the front desk looked terrified. He didn't even speak, just handed me a key with his hand shaking. Room 214. He didn't need to say anything else. I'd seen that look before. He'd already seen what was inside. We climbed the narrow concrete stairs, paint chipping off the rails. The hallway smelled like mildew and cleaning solution. Every door had scratches around the handle, like they'd been forced open before. Room 214 was near the end. The air conditioner inside was blasting so hard, I could feel the cold leaking out from the crack under the door. That was the first odd detail. People overdosing in August didn't usually have the AC on full blast. I unlocked the door and pushed it open. The cold air hit me first. It smelled like stale perfume and something sour underneath. Body odor, maybe vomit. The blinds were drawn tight, but the TV light flickered against the wall. The bed was a mess, sheets tangled, pillows on the floor. 2 people were on it, a man and a woman. Both looked mid-30s. The woman was sprawled flat on her back, pale, lips starting to turn blue. The man sat slumped next to her, upright but barely. His head tilted forward, eyes half open, pupils tiny pinpoints. He was breathing but barely, slow, shallow, and wet. On the dresser across from them was a camera tripod. Red light blinking. Recording, I went straight to her. She was cold to the touch, skin clammy, jaw starting to stiffen. I checked for a pulse. Nothing at first. Then a faint thud that vanished again. A syringe lay near the nightstand. Half full, dark residue at the bottom. Another one on the floor by his bare foot. The air felt wrong. Too cold, too still. The steady hum of the AC drowning out the sound of my own breathing. My partner started prepping the Narcan while I tried to clear her airway. Her lips were sticky, teeth clenched. I tilted her head, started compressions, counting silently, trying to find a rhythm in that mess of cold air and mechanical humming. The man's breathing slowed even more. His eyes rolled back. I moved fast. Narcan in one nostril, second dose ready if he didn't come back. Within seconds, his chest jerked. A harsh cough tore out of him. And then he started gasping. He looked around wildly, confusion turning to panic. His hands clawed at the sheet, trying to cover the woman's body. His face twisted in something between horror and denial. Kept working on her, but I knew from the way her chest stayed still that she wasn't coming back. We unplugged the camera. The blinking light went dark, but it felt like the room didn't get any quieter. The cold made everything sharper. The hum of the AC, the distant buzz of the neon outside, even the faint click of the cooling metal inside the old air unit. I remember looking down at her hand, fingers curled slightly, a ring with a cracked blue stone on one. Her nails were clean, painted weeks ago maybe. Small things always stood out in scenes like that. Signs that people didn't expect to die that day. The room told its own story. Empty water bottles on the floor, fast food wrappers, a half-drunk soda can on the nightstand. A laptop sat open facing the camera like it was streaming or recording too. A single bright lamp pointed toward the bed, wires trailing into a tangle near the wall outlet. It looked improvised, cheap, desperate. Like everything in that place. When you've done this job long enough, you can almost sense the moments before it happened. Maybe they were laughing, maybe arguing. Maybe one of them thought the dose was smaller than it was. Maybe the camera had been rolling for hours before they even realized what was happening. We carried her to the stretcher, zipped the bag, and took her down the same narrow stairs. The clerk at the front desk stared but didn't move. Outside, the air was thick and hot again, the sudden shift from freezing to dry heat making me dizzy. The police arrived a few minutes later. We told them what we saw. The man was conscious by then, slumped against the wall by the vending machine, breathing hard, tears streaking his face, sweat mixing with the chill that still clung to him from the room. He didn't say anything, just stared through us like he wasn't fully back yet. When the detectives went inside, I stayed out by the rig, writing down times and notes. I could see the second-floor window of room 214 from where I stood. The blinds moved slightly from the AC vent inside, a faint pulse of cold air pushing against the glass. The neon sign outside kept flickering, red, then dark, then red again. The reflection of it lit the window every few seconds like a heartbeat. After about 20 minutes, one of the officers came down holding the camera. Said it was evidence. He didn't look me in the eye when he walked past. I knew what was on it. Probably the whole thing. That's the part that gets stuck in your head later. Not the death, but the fact that someone was watching themselves die and didn't even realize it. I could still hear the faint beep from the device when it lost power. It echoed, faint but sharp, in my head long after we'd cleared the call. We restocked the Narcan, wiped down the gear, and logged the scene. Routine. That word never really means anything in this job, but it's what we say. I sat in the cab of the rig, sweating, staring at my hands. They were shaking slightly from the adrenaline drop. My partner smoked outside by the curb, leaning on the bumper, staring up at the row of flickering signs. The hum of the freeway in the distance mixed with the crackle of the motel's broken lights. Everything in Bakersfield felt baked in heat and dust even at night. We didn't talk on the way back to the station. The radio was quiet, and the only sound was the rumble of the tires and the soft buzz of the AC in the cab. When I closed my eyes, I kept seeing that camera light. Just a tiny red dot in a freezing cold room, still blinking while two people slipped away next to it. Strange how small details burn into your memory like that. Not the big things, the body, the blood, the smell, but the sound of that faint beep, the cold air on your skin, the way a cheap motel curtain moves in the vent breeze. Later that night, back at the station, I washed my hands 3 times even though I'd worn gloves. I sat for a long time trying to write my report. The words looked mechanical on the page. Female, 30s, unresponsive. No pulse upon arrival, Asystole confirmed. Resuscitation unsuccessful. But behind those lines were images I couldn't erase. The cold skin, the ring with the cracked stone, the plastic camera still recording everything. I thought about how many rooms like that exist on stretches of highway nobody talks about. Different faces, same endings. People chasing something, filming it maybe, hoping it'll change things. And it always ends the same way. Cheap sheets, chemical smell, empty stares. I remember stepping outside before heading home that night. The city was quiet. The heat finally broke a little. A breeze came through the lot, carrying dust and the faint sound of traffic from the 99. I could see the motel's sign from a few blocks away, still flickering, still red. That faint camera beep stayed in my head all night. It wasn't loud or haunting, just steady, like a small reminder of how quick everything stops. A sound meant to tell you something's recording, but in that room, it was like it was warning instead. By morning, it was gone, replaced by the next call, the next address, another routine overdose on another street. Bakersfield doesn't stop. It just hums on, hot and dry, swallowing everything that happens after dark. That night, though, the sound followed me home. When I lay down, the hum of my own AC sounded the same pitch as that beep. It kept me awake for hours. I thought about the man still alive, probably sitting in a hospital bed somewhere, detoxing, trying to piece together what happened. I wondered if he remembered the camera light too. I wondered if he'd ever go back for it. I doubted it. In this job, you tell yourself you'll forget scenes like that. You say you've seen worse, but it's never the blood or the death that sticks. It's the quiet mechanical things, the small details that outlive the people in them. For me, it's that sound in a freezing motel room on a hot August night. The sound of a camera recording nothing but cold air and silence long after everything else stopped. It was a Friday night in late September 2016, warm for that time of year in Columbus. High Street was busy like always. Bars open, students out. The sound of music leaking from open doors and cigarette smoke hanging over the sidewalks. My partner and I had just cleared from another call when dispatch came over the radio. Intoxicated female. Possible fall. Upstairs apartment above O'Malley's bar, High Street. We were only a few blocks away. The street outside the bar was packed with people laughing, shouting, taking selfies under the neon lights. It was the usual weekend chaos. We pulled the rig into the alley behind the building, lights reflecting off the damp bricks. The back stairwell door was propped open, heavy bass thumping through the walls. I could smell beer and sweat before we even made it halfway up the steps. The apartment was small, just one bedroom, a kitchen, and a bathroom off to the side. The door was open, lights on inside. A man in his late 20s stood in the middle of the living room, eyes red, face pale. He said something, but I barely heard it over the muffled noise from below. He pointed toward the bedroom. The woman was lying on the floor halfway between the bed and the nightstand. There was blood, more than I expected from a fall. It had pooled under her head and spread out unevenly, soaking into the carpet in a dark halo. The corner of the nightstand had a sharp edge, streaked with fresh red. At first glance, it could have been what dispatch said, a drunk fall. She was maybe mid-20s. Brown hair spread across the floor, one arm under her body, the other bent awkwardly. I crouched down, felt for a pulse on her neck. It was there, faint but there. Her skin was still warm. My partner was already pulling the monitor out of the bag, but something about the scene didn't look right. The position of her body, the way the blood had flowed, it didn't match a straight fall. There were drag marks in the carpet, slight but visible, like someone had shifted her after the fact. I looked at the man again. He was standing near the couch now, both hands on his knees, head down. He kept mumbling that she fell, that she was just drunk. His shirt was half-buttoned, collar damp with sweat. He reeked of whiskey, but his hands were clean. Not a drop of blood. We rolled her slightly to get better access. Her head wound was deep, right at the temple, and there was bruising around her jaw and neck that didn't look new. Her fingernails were broken, rough, and I noticed something dark under them. I thought at first it was dirt, but when the light hit it, it was dried blood. She had fought someone. That much was obvious. We started working. Oxygen, vitals, checking responsiveness, but she wasn't waking up. Her breathing was shallow, pulse weakening. My partner radioed for backup and the police. I kept my eyes moving around the room. The sheets on the bed were half off, a lamp on the floor and a phone with a cracked screen near the foot of the bed. There was a small streak of blood on the wall about knee height, not from the head wound. Something had happened before she hit the floor. The guy kept hovering, asking if she'd be okay, but he sounded distant, detached. I remember how calm he looked when I told him to step back. He nodded, sat down on the couch and buried his face in his hands. His shoulders moved like he was crying, but when I glanced at him again, there weren't any tears. He just stared through his fingers, quiet, like he was waiting for something. We loaded her onto the stretcher. Her pupils were blown by the time we got her into the rig. I was doing compressions when the cops pulled up. The guy didn't follow us down the stairs. He just stood at the top, swaying slightly, watching. At the hospital, the trauma team took over fast. They intubated, worked on her for what felt like forever. I was standing against the wall, gloves covered in blood, trying to process what I'd seen. The ER doc looked at me after they called it blunt force trauma, not a simple fall, he said quietly. We cleaned up, filled out the report, turned in our gear. I couldn't shake the image of the blood pattern on that carpet. The way it spread in two directions. I knew what I'd seen. I knew that woman hadn't just tripped and fallen. 2 days later, my supervisor called me in. The police had ruled it a homicide. They wanted statements from everyone who'd been on scene. The boyfriend's story didn't hold up. They found scratches on his arms and traces of her DNA under her nails. He'd tried to clean himself up before calling 911 but hadn't realized how much blood seeps into skin. When I testified later, they asked me about what I noticed first. I told them the clean hands, the uneven blood pool, the drag marks, the fingernails. Small details that stuck out in a room that otherwise looked like any other domestic scene gone bad. I didn't add anything beyond what I'd seen. I didn't need to. She'd fought hard and he'd left her there, waiting just long enough to make sure she wouldn't get back up. After that call, I started paying more attention to the quiet details in every scene. The direction a spill runs, the marks on a wall, the position of a body that doesn't make sense. You learn that sometimes. The horror isn't in what you see right away, but in what someone tried to hide. I still remember her face, the small cut on her lip, the faint freckles across her nose, the way her hair fanned out on the carpet like she was asleep, and him, sitting there so still while we worked, pretending to wipe his eyes, pretending to care. Some scenes fade over time. That one didn't. Every time I drove down High Street after that, I'd look up at that narrow stairwell behind the bar and think about how normal it all looked from the outside. Just another weekend night in Columbus. Music, laughter, people stumbling home. No one would ever know that upstairs, in that cramped little room, someone's life had ended. And that the man who did it sat on the couch, calm as can be, while we tried to save her. It was one of those February nights in Duluth when the air feels heavy and frozen at the same time. The streets were quiet, snow piled against curbs, the temperature sitting somewhere around 0. It was close to 4 a.m. when dispatch sent us to a call at Lakeside Extended Care. The note just said cardiac arrest. Nothing unusual. Nursing home calls were part of the job. Half the time it was a hospice patient whose heart had finally stopped. Usually calm scenes. When we pulled into the lot, something felt off immediately. The building was dark, normally. A few exterior lights stay on, but only one above the door flickered weakly. The parking lot was empty except for a single car half buried in snow. No one met us at the entrance. I hit the buzzer, no answer. Tried again. Nothing. We looked through the glass doors, dim hallway, a TV flickering in the distance, but no movement. I pushed the handle. It opened. The air inside was warm but wrong, thick, heavy, and stale, the kind of air that hasn't moved in hours. The front desk was empty, a phone blinking with missed calls. A chart lay open, pages bent, pen still on top. I called out. No response. We walked farther down the hall. Every door we passed was cracked open. TVs on in most rooms, screens flashing silently. No sound, no call lights, no alarms. Just the faint hum of the heating system. Halfway down the corridor, we found a nurse sitting on the floor against the wall. Her scrubs were wrinkled, eyes glazed, skin pale. She didn't speak at first, just stared at us like she couldn't process we were there. Then she raised a shaky hand and pointed down the hall. "Room 14, she whispered. The patient inside was already gone. Elderly male, lying peacefully, covers pulled up to his chest. No sign of distress. No struggle. Just gone. But something didn't feel right. The air in the room felt even thicker. My head started to pound. Dave, my partner, looked pale. We checked the next room. Another resident, same story. No pulse, no movement, calm face. By the fourth room, it clicked. I pulled my portable carbon monoxide meter from my belt. The screen lit up. 110 ppm. Dangerous. Lethal with enough exposure. We grabbed the nurse, who was barely conscious by then, and started dragging her toward the entrance. The monitor kept beeping, numbers climbing. My chest felt tight. The air was like syrup. When the doors finally opened, the blast of freezing air hit us like a slap. It felt clean. I could breathe again. The nurse collapsed on the ground, shaking. Dave ran for the oxygen while I radioed for help. Multiple unresponsive patients. Probable CO poisoning. Entire building compromised. Fire crews arrived within minutes. They went in with meters and masks. Readings hit over 200 ppm in some rooms. The heating system had failed. A cracked boiler venting gas into the air ducts all night. The residents never stood a chance. Most were already asleep when the poisoning started. They would have just gotten drowsy, slipped under, and never woken up. The nurse had stayed behind, thinking everyone was just resting. She kept checking rooms, breathing the same air until she could barely stand. We took her to the hospital. She survived barely. On the way, she kept whispering the same line. I thought they were sleeping. That night never left me. The quiet halls, the flickering TVs, the way death moved through the building without a sound. No alarms, no chaos, just stillness. 12 people died before sunrise, every winter since. When I walk into a warm room after being out in the cold, I still think about that place. The silence, the heavy air, the nurse on the floor. She almost joined them, and she never even knew it was happening. It was the quietest tragedy I've ever seen, the kind that doesn't make the news for long, but stays with you forever.